The Confederation of Enlightened Minds had spent the better part of 4 millennia perfecting the art of warfare, which was rather like spending 4 millennia perfecting the art of making tea by studying the molecular structure of water while completely ignoring the existence of tea leaves. Their military academy on Nexus Prime stood as a monument to this particular brand of intellectual masturbation. Gleaming spires that reached toward the stars, filled with beings who could calculate the optimal trajectory for a plasma bolt, while remaining blissfully ignorant of the fact that wars were won by whoever was still breathing when the shooting stopped. The Academy's philosophy was elegantly simple and catastrophically flawed. Warfare was mathematics, strategy was art, and violence was merely the unfortunate side effect of improperly calculated equations. They had transformed the ancient business of killing your enemies before they killed you into something resembling a doctoral thesis defense, complete with peer reviews and aesthetic critiques. Their lecture halls buzzed with discussions of optimal formation dynamics and harmonic weapon frequencies. Their simulation chambers ran endless scenarios where victory was determined by whoever demonstrated the most sophisticated understanding of battlefield geometry. Their graduates emerged with an encyclopedic knowledge of 17 different tactical philosophies and absolutely no idea what to do when someone started shooting at them with the genuine intention of reducing them to their component atoms. Into this bastion of refined military thinking walked Kira Blackwood, former Earth Marine turned reluctantly appointed tactical consultant, carrying the sort of practical education that could only be acquired by spending several years in environments where poor tactical decisions were immediately corrected by explosive decompression or hostile alien fauna with poor table manners. At 28, Kira possessed the lean, economical build of someone whose ancestors had spent millions of years perfecting the art of not being eaten by things with more teeth than brain cells. Her service record read like a catalog of conflicts the Confederation preferred to pretend didn't exist: the Proxima Uprising, the Kepler Station Incident, the absolutely unmentionable events surrounding the Fourth Colony War. She moved through the Academy's pristine corridors with a sort of predatory awareness that made the faculty profoundly uncomfortable, like a wolf that had wandered into a philosophy department. Admiral Zenth of the Octarine Empire exemplified everything the Confederation stood for. His species had evolved from deep ocean dwellers who had achieved spaceflight by building really impressive coral reefs and eventually launching them into orbit. His 8 arms moved in perfect synchronization as he manipulated holographic battle displays, each gesture calculated to demonstrate his mastery of what he called combat choreography. War, to Admiral Zenth, was chess played with laser cannons, and he had never met a tactical problem that couldn't be solved through the application of sufficient mathematical elegance. The key to victory, he would lecture his students while his arms traced graceful patterns through the air, lies in achieving perfect harmonic resonance between offensive capabilities and defensive positioning. Violence is merely the manifestation of poorly balanced equations. General Flux represented the heliotrope approach to warfare, which treated combat as an extension of their species' natural artistic inclinations. The heliotropes had achieved consciousness by growing into increasingly complex crystalline structures over several geological epochs, and they approached military strategy with the same methodical precision their ancestors had used to achieve perfect geometric forms. To General Flux, a properly executed battle plan should be indistinguishable from a masterpiece of kinetic sculpture. Observe the elegant curves of this flanking maneuver, she would demonstrate, her crystalline form refracting light into dazzling patterns as she adjusted holographic fleet positions. Note how the supporting elements create visual harmony while maintaining tactical coherence. True military genius lies in creating victory that is beautiful to contemplate. Commander Wylix of the Etherian Collective brought a philosophical dimension to the Academy's approach that somehow managed to make warfare even more abstract than it already was. The Etherians existed as sentient gas clouds who had developed technology by achieving collective consciousness through really impressive weather patterns. Commander Wylix approached combat as an exercise in applied ethics, where the moral implications of each tactical decision were at least as important as their practical effectiveness. We must consider the existential ramifications of aggressive action. Ilix would intone, his gaseous form swirling with contemplative energy. True victory is achieved not through the destruction of one's enemies, but through the demonstration of superior philosophical understanding of the cosmic principles underlying conflict resolution. These three luminaries of military thought had spent 6 months observing Kira's integration into the Academy's educational program with the sort of horrified fascination typically reserved for particularly gruesome traffic accidents. She attended their lectures with polite attention, participated in their tactical simulations with professional competence, and consistently produced results that violated every principle of enlightened warfare while somehow achieving the stated objectives. The human approaches combat like a barbarian, Admiral Zenth complained during one of their regular faculty meetings, his arms writhing with distress. No appreciation for tactical aesthetics, no understanding of strategic harmony. She treats warfare like some sort of survival contest. Her methods lack philosophical coherence, Commander Ulix agreed, his gaseous form contracting with disapproval. She focuses obsessively on practical outcomes while ignoring the moral and intellectual frameworks that give warfare its deeper meaning. General Flux's crystalline structure flickered with what might have been artistic outrage. Her tactical solutions are positively crude. No elegance, no beauty, no appreciation for the sublime geometry of properly orchestrated violence. She approaches military problems like an engineer rather than an artist. What none of them seemed to grasp was that Kira approached military problems like someone whose ancestors had survived 4 billion years of evolution, being very, very good at killing things that needed killing, while avoiding being killed by things that didn't particularly care about the philosophical implications of their dietary choices. The emergency that would change everything arrived on what the Academy's scheduling computers had designated as a routine Tuesday. Though time was admittedly a flexible concept when you lived on a space station orbiting a trinary star system. Long-range sensors detected an unknown fleet at the edge of Confederate space, 47 vessels of completely unfamiliar design, moving with the sort of purposeful coordination that suggested hostile intent rather than diplomatic curiosity. The fleet identified itself through actions rather than communications, systematically destroying 3 outer system monitoring stations with weapons that seemed to ignore conventional shielding technologies. The attacks were swift, efficient, and absolutely merciless, leaving nothing but debris fields and radio silence where sophisticated defensive installations had existed moments before. Admiral Zenth assembled the Academy's finest tactical minds to address what he confidently announced would be a minor demonstration of superior Confederate military doctrine. The response fleet would consist of 12 heavy cruisers, 36 escort vessels, and the Academy's most advanced command ship, allowing their best students to observe real-world applications of everything they'd learned about enlightened warfare. This will be an excellent opportunity to demonstrate the superiority of calculated tactics over primitive aggression, Zenth announced during the mission briefing, his arms dancing through complex patterns as he outlined their strategy. We'll engage at optimal range, maintaining perfect formation integrity while systematically dismantling their crude offensive capabilities. General Flux had contributed her expertise by designing what she called a kinetically harmonious engagement pattern that would allow the Confederate fleet to achieve victory while creating visual formations that could be appreciated from multiple angles. Notice how our approach vectors create pleasing geometric relationships, she explained, her crystalline form glowing with artistic satisfaction. The enemy will be defeated not merely through superior firepower, but through the demonstration of tactical beauty that transcends mere military effectiveness. Commander Wilix had insisted on including philosophical considerations in their strategic planning, developing what he termed ethically optimal engagement protocols that would minimize unnecessary destruction while maximizing the educational value of the encounter. We must remember that warfare is ultimately about communication, he lectured, his gaseous form swirling with professorial authority. Through the proper application of graduated force, We can teach these primitives the error of their aggressive impulses. Kira had listened to their presentations with the sort of polite attention she might have given to a lecture on the mating habits of extinct mollusks, occasionally asking questions that her colleagues found either deeply insightful or completely insane. "What do we know about their weapons technology?" she inquired. "Irrelevant," Admiral Zenth replied with the confidence of someone who had never been shot at by weapons that weren't supposed to exist. Proper tactical positioning makes specific weapon characteristics meaningless. Have we established any communication with them? Communication will be established through the demonstration of superior strategic thinking, Commander Wilex assured her. Words are unnecessary when actions can convey philosophical principles. What's our fallback position if the primary strategy fails? General Flux's crystalline form flickered with what might have been amusement. Failure is not aesthetically compatible with proper tactical execution. Our formations are mathematically perfect. Kira nodded politely and began making private preparations for what her experience suggested would be a very educational disaster. The engagement began exactly as Admiral Zenth had planned, which should have been the first warning sign that something was about to go catastrophically wrong. The Confederate fleet approached in perfect formation, maintaining optimal spacing and firing angles, while demonstrating the sort of tactical discipline that looked magnificent in Academy simulations and worked beautifully against opponents who followed the same rules. Unfortunately, the enemy fleet seemed to have missed the lectures on proper engagement protocols. Instead of responding to the Confederate sophisticated positioning with equally sophisticated counterpositioning, they simply opened fire with weapons that appeared to operate on entirely different principles than anything in the Confederation's extensive database of known military technologies. The Confederate shields, optimized for deflecting conventional energy weapons with maximum aesthetic appeal, proved entirely inadequate against whatever exotic physics the attackers were employing. The first 3 ships simply vanished, not destroyed so much as translated into a different state of existence that was considerably less conducive to continued operation. "This is unexpected," Admiral Zenth observed as his perfect formation disintegrated around him, his arms flailing in patterns that conveyed profound tactical confusion. "Their approach lacks philosophical coherence," Commander Yelix complained, his gaseous form rippling with intellectual distress. "How can we respond appropriately to strategies that make no rational sense?" General Flux watched her kinetically harmonious engagement pattern collapse into chaos and declared the entire situation aesthetically offensive. The enemy ships moved like predators rather than dancers, ignoring the beautiful geometric relationships she had created and focusing with tedious single-mindedness on the destruction of Confederate vessels. Within 30 minutes, what had begun as a demonstration of superior tactical doctrine had devolved into something considerably more primitive and significantly less educational than anyone had anticipated. The enemy fleet, which Confederate intelligence had designated the Void Reapers, with the sort of dramatic flair that military bureaucrats mistook for intimidation, proved to be frustratingly immune to enlightened warfare. They didn't maintain proper formation spacing, instead swarming like pack hunters around individual targets. They ignored the rules of engagement that would have made for a more civilized conflict, concentrating their fire on critical systems rather than engaging in the sort of elegant weapon exchanges that allowed both sides to demonstrate their tactical sophistication. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to actually be trying to win rather than simply participating in a mutual demonstration of military competence. Admiral Zenth found himself in the unprecedented position of commanding a fleet that was losing a battle, which was not a scenario covered in any of his tactical training. His mathematical models suggested that victory was still achievable through the proper application of theoretical principles. But his practical situation suggested that theory and practice were currently having a fundamental disagreement about the nature of reality. Tactical consultant Blackwood, report to the command center immediately, he announced over the ship's communication system, his voice carrying the sort of desperate authority that came from discovering that being right in principle was significantly different from being alive in practice. Kira arrived to find the command center in a state of controlled panic, which was rather like controlled nuclear fission, theoretically possible, but practically unlikely to end well. Admiral Zent's 8 arms were moving in increasingly frantic patterns as he attempted to reconcile his perfect tactical theories with the distinctly imperfect reality of ships exploding around him. The enemy is not responding appropriately to our strategic initiatives, he explained, his voice carrying a note of personal injury, as if the Void Reapers were being deliberately rude by refusing to die in aesthetically pleasing ways. They appear to be ignoring established protocols for civilized warfare, General Flux added, her crystalline form flickering with outraged artistic sensibilities. Their methods lack any coherent philosophical framework, Commander Wilex observed, his gaseous essence swirling with intellectual confusion. Kira studied the tactical display, noting the way Confederate ships were being systematically eliminated by an enemy that seemed to understand something her colleagues had forgotten. The purpose of warfare was not to demonstrate superior strategic thinking, but to make the other guy stop shooting at you, preferably by ensuring he was no longer capable of shooting at anything. "Give me command authorization," she said quietly. "I beg your pardon?" Admiral Zent's arms froze mid-gesture. "Emergency tactical command. Give it to me, or watch your fleet get massacred by someone who actually understands what a war is." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of another Confederate cruiser translating itself into high-energy particles, which provided a compelling argument for reconsidering established command protocols. "Very well." Admiral Zent conceded with the sort of gracious defeat that came from recognizing that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "Emergency tactical command is yours." Kira's first order was to break formation, which caused every Confederate officer present to experience what could only be described as a crisis of professional faith. Formation integrity was the foundation of civilized warfare, the visible manifestation of tactical discipline and strategic coherence. "Scatter the fleet," she commanded. "Random vectors, no pattern, maximum acceleration." "But the formation," General Flux whispered, her crystalline structure dimming with artistic horror. "Formations are targets," Kira replied with the sort of brutal practicality that came from learning military strategy in environments where poor decisions were immediately corrected by violent death. Beautiful, predictable, easy-to-kill targets. Her second order violated every principle of honorable engagement that the Confederation held sacred. "All ships, target their engines. Don't try to fight fair, fight to win." Commander Wilex's gaseous form contracted with philosophical distress. But the ethical implications of deliberately targeting propulsion systems. Ethics are what you worry about after you've survived long enough to have the luxury of moral contemplation. Kira interrupted. "Right now, we're not having a philosophical debate. We're having a fight to the death, and the other side already knows it." What followed was 47 minutes of the most educational experience in military history. Under Kira's direction, the Confederate fleet abandoned every principle of civilized warfare and embraced the wording action, a sort of pragmatic violence that had made humanity the dominant species on a planet where everything was trying to eat everything else. Ships that had been trained to maintain perfect geometric relationships began hunting in coordinated packs, using asteroid fields and stellar phenomena as cover rather than maintaining clear lines of sight for aesthetic appreciation. Commanders who had learned to engage enemies at optimal range for maximum visual impact discovered the tactical advantages of point-blank surprise attacks that prioritized effectiveness over elegance. Most shocking of all, they began to win. The Void Reapers, who had steamrolled through Confederate defenses with contemptuous ease, suddenly found themselves facing opponents who fought like the universe was actually trying to kill them. Ships appeared from unexpected angles, ignored established rules about fair engagement distances, and demonstrated a disturbing willingness to sacrifice tactical beauty in favor of tactical results. "This is working," Admiral Zent observed with a sort of amazed discovery typically reserved for major scientific breakthroughs, watching his scattered fleet systematically dismantle enemy vessels through the application of what could only be called organized savagery. "It's horrible," General Flux whispered, though her crystalline form was brightening with what might have been reluctant appreciation as she watched Confederate ships achieve victory through methods that violated every aesthetic principle she held dear. "It's completely unethical," Commander Wilix added, his gaseous essence swirling with conflicted emotions as he observed the practical effectiveness of deliberately unfair tactical approaches. "It's war," Kira said simply, coordinating a 3-ship ambush that eliminated the largest Void Reaper vessel through the time-honored military technique of shooting it until it stopped moving. "This is what it actually looks like when you strip away all the philosophy and mathematics and artistic pretensions. One side lives, one side dies, and the universe doesn't care which side had the prettier formations." The tide of battle turned, with the sort of decisive finality that came from applying 4 billion years of evolutionary pressure to a military problem. The Confederate fleet, now fighting with a practical ruthlessness that had made their human consultant famous throughout the outer colonies, systematically eliminated Void Reaper vessels with methods that would have horrified their instructors and absolutely delighted their ancestors. Ships rammed enemy vessels when their weapons were depleted, sacrificing themselves with the sort of calculated desperation that turned mathematical loss into practical victory. Commanders, who had been trained to consider the moral implications of every tactical decision, discovered the liberating efficiency of simply killing their enemies before their enemies could kill them. When the engagement ended, 17 Confederate ships remained operational out of the original 48, which represented the sort of casualty ratio that would normally be considered a catastrophic defeat. But the Void Reaper fleet had been completely eliminated, their exotic weapons and superior technology proving inadequate against opponents who approached warfare as a survival contest rather than an intellectual exercise. The aftermath was even more educational than the battle itself. Confederate officers who had spent their careers studying the theoretical principles of tactical engagement found themselves grappling with the practical reality that winning ugly was significantly preferable to losing beautifully. "I don't understand how this is possible," Admiral Zenth confessed during the post-engagement analysis, his arms moving in confused patterns as he reviewed sensor data that contradicted everything he thought he knew about military strategy. Their technology was superior, their formations were mathematically optimal, their weapons clearly operated on more advanced principles than ours. But they didn't know how to fight, Kira explained with the patience of someone teaching basic concepts to particularly slow students. They had better tools, but they didn't understand what tools are for. They approached this like a chess match when it was actually a knife fight. General Flux's crystalline form flickered with the sort of artistic confusion that came from discovering that practical effectiveness could be more beautiful than theoretical perfection. "Your methods achieved victory, but they violated every aesthetic principle that gives warfare its meaning." "Warfare doesn't have meaning," Kira replied. "It has results. The meaning is what you apply to those results after you've survived long enough to think about philosophy." Commander Wilix's gaseous essence swirled with the sort of philosophical distress that came from discovering that his deepest beliefs about the nature of conflict were not merely wrong but dangerously irrelevant. "But if we abandon ethical frameworks in combat, how do we distinguish ourselves from simple murderers?" "By murdering the right people," Kira said with a sort of casual brutality that made her colleagues simultaneously horrified and oddly reassured. "The difference between a soldier and a killer is that soldiers kill people who are trying to kill them first." The transformation that followed was both rapid and complete. Word of the engagement spread throughout Confederate space, with the speed that only really interesting disasters could achieve. Within a month, every military academy in the Confederation was requesting detailed briefings on something they called the Blackwood Doctrine, which seemed to consist primarily of forgetting everything they thought they knew about civilized warfare and learning to fight like the universe was personally trying to kill them. Kira found herself promoted to Supreme Tactical Coordinator, a position that had been created specifically to accommodate someone whose approach to military strategy couldn't be contained within existing organizational structures. Her new office came with a view of the Academy's training facilities, where she could watch the galaxy's finest military minds, learning to abandon their finest military principles in favor of methods that actually worked. Admiral Zenth had become an unexpected evangelist for what he called applied survival mathematics, developing new tactical theories that incorporated previously ignored variables, like killing the enemy before they kill you, and winning through methods that work rather than methods that look impressive. General Flux had discovered that practical effectiveness possessed its own aesthetic appeal, creating what she termed functional beauty through tactical approaches that achieved victory through efficiency rather than elegance. Her new combat formations resembled predatory hunting patterns more than geometric artwork, and they were devastatingly effective. Commander Wylix had developed an entirely new philosophical framework for understanding warfare, based on the revolutionary concept that the primary ethical obligation of a military force was to protect the people it served by destroying the people trying to hurt them. His lectures on practical moral applications in terminal conflict resolution were surprisingly popular among students who had previously found his theoretical approaches completely useless. 6 months after the Void Reaper engagement, the Confederation of Enlightened Minds had completed its transformation into something that would have horrified its founders. A military organization that actually understood what militaries were for. Their academies now graduated officers who could calculate optimal firing solutions, while simultaneously understanding that the point of those calculations was to make enemy ships stop working permanently. The galaxy had learned, through the most expensive educational program in recorded history, that there was a difference between studying warfare and understanding it. They had discovered that all the mathematical precision and artistic beauty in the universe couldn't substitute for the simple, brutal knowledge that survival was about killing the other guy before he killed you. But they still preferred to let the humans handle the really dangerous assignments. After all, that's what Deathworlders were for, teaching the galaxy that sometimes the most sophisticated response to a complex problem was a very large explosion applied with extreme prejudice to exactly the right target at precisely the right moment. The Confederation of Enlightened Minds still believed that intelligence could solve any problem. They had simply learned to define intelligence as knowing when to stop thinking and start shooting,